So I read 11 books this summer. Let's talk about them. I was very certain that this was gonna be a 5-star read for me. And this little girl like briefly thinks about with a rooster. The characters are some of my favorite characters I have ever read. I'm just gonna go in order through July and then through August with what I read. So the first 2 books I read in July, I actually have a reading vlog for. So if you want to hear more of my thoughts in detail, you can check that out. I won't go too in depth in this. But the first book that I read was The Flatshare by Beth O'Leary. And this book follows Tiffy and Leon, who become roommates when Tiffy is looking to move out of her toxic ex-boyfriend's apartment. The catch of this arrangement is that Tiffy and Leon have to share a bed. But Tiffy works during the day and Leon works at night, so they are never in the apartment at the same time. And then they start leaving post-it notes around the apartment for each other, and a connection and a friendship develops, and maybe even something more. And this book, I did not think I didn't think I was not gonna like it. Like, I didn't think it was gonna be bad. I just wasn't like that excited about reading it, but I loved this book. I loved it so much. The characters are some of my favorite characters I have ever read. I feel like it's very unique. The characters had such personality. I loved both of them and the way they supported and uplifted each other throughout this book so much. Their romance in this book is amazing, but it's not necessarily the main plot point because Tiffy is going through a lot with the toxic relationship she'd been in and coming to terms with that, and Leon is dealing with his brother who was wrongly accused of a crime and is currently in prison and trying to get him out. And so they're both going through like these big life changes and just there for each other and supporting each other through it, and it's just so cute. So I ended up giving this book 4.5 stars. The only reason it wasn't 5 stars is because I felt like it took a little bit to get into and a little bit to get used to like the writing style of this book. The second book I read, which is in the same video as The Flatshare, is One of Us is Lying by Karen McManus, and this, I'm sure you probably know what this is about, but it's about 5 high school students who walk into detention and then one of them dies in detention and the other 4 become like the main suspects in his murder because they're the last ones to see him alive. And it was fine. I gave this book 3 stars. It was good. It entertained me. I read it pretty fast, but I feel like the characters weren't that interesting to me. The ending to me of this book, without spoiling anything, just felt like a little bit anticlimactic. There is 2 more books in the series. I probably will read them at some point, but I am in no rush to read them right now, which is saying something for me because I am definitely the type of person that needs to read a series like back to back, but I just like, it's fine. It was fine. Then the next book I read in July was a reread, which was Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This is about Alex Claremont Diaz, who is the son of the President of the United States, and Henry, who is a prince. And they start off as like rivals until this like incident where they kind of just ruin a royal wedding, and then they have to spend more time together to diffuse any rumors about them hating each other, and they slowly fall in love. And this book I read, I think like in March of 2022, so it'd been over a year, and I wanted to read it before the movie came out, which, side note, the movie was really good. And I love this book. It's so cute. It's so beautifully written. I love Casey McQuiston's writing. I need to pick up more of their books. It's so like poetic and amazing, and I loved it even more the second time because I picked up on things that I kind of missed the first time I read it. I gave this book 4.5 stars. I think the first time I read it, I gave it 4 stars. I mean, it's still kind of 4 stars, but I just like, it made me happy, and I liked that. It's definitely very idealistic. The ending is a little bit cringe, a little very, very unrealistic, but it's very beautiful and uplifting. I like that this romance kind of evolves from like enemies to like friends with benefits to like falling in love, and there's no like annoying third act breakup, which is the part I always dread in romance books because it always feels like it's over the dumbest thing. So this book doesn't have that, which I appreciate. The next book I read was How the King of Elfheim Learned to Hate Stories, and this is a novella, I guess, about Prince Cardan from the Cruel Prince trilogy, and it basically just follows like little pieces of his life from like childhood to kind of the future after the Cruel Prince series. It's such a beautiful book. I am so in love with the artwork in this. Like, the chapters kind of open like this. There's beautiful drawings of the characters, and it was just so much fun to look through, and it reads kind of like a dark fairy tale almost, which I really enjoyed. So this was a pretty fast read. I think I read it in like an hour or 2. It's not very long, and the font is pretty big, and a lot of the pages are just like illustrations. But I gave this book 4 stars. I think it's a great little addition to the world, and to learn a little bit more insight into Prince Cardan and how he like became the person he is in the Cruel Prince series. The next book I I read is The Only One Left by Riley Sager. I read The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager a couple months ago, and I really liked it, and I really like his writing style, so I wanted to pick up another one of his books. The reason I picked this one up mainly was because of the creepy nursery rhyme on the back, and it is, "At 17, Lenora Hope hung her sister with a rope, stabbed her father with a knife, took her mother's happy life. It wasn't me, Lenora said, but she's the only one not dead." So this book is about Lenora Hope, who, when she was 17 years old, her entire family was murdered, and she was the only survivor. And so everyone kind of assumes that she killed them, but there was never any evidence, so it was never proven. And then it follows her life like 50 years later, and our main character, Kit, who ends up looking after her in her old age and learning her story. And I really, really enjoyed this book. It's my favorite book by Riley Sager that I've read. I gave this book 4 stars. I could not have guessed the ending of this. It was very, very creepy, and throughout the book you kind of get a mixture between the present and like Kit's point of view, and then typewriter pages, I don't know if it's focusing, but typewriter pages of Lenora typing out like her past, because in the present of this book she had a stroke and can't speak or use her body. Basically she can only use her left hand, or maybe it's her right hand. She can only use one of her hands, so she's typing out her story for Kit on a typewriter. You are questioning everyone throughout the book, and there's nothing else I would ask for in a thriller. And then the next book I read was another reread, which was Beach Read by Emily Henry. I read this also like last March probably, so like a year and a half ago, and it's such a summery book, and I've been watching a ton of booktubers reread this summer, and it made me want to reread it also because I didn't really remember much about what happened. Once again, I enjoyed this book more the second time I read it. I feel like I picked up on so many more things that I didn't the first time. It's about Augustus Everett and January Andrews, who are both writers, but Augustus writes literary fiction and January writes romance. And they end up staying next to each other in these cottages one summer, and both of them have like super intense writer's block, so they make a bet to swap genres for the summer and see who can write and sell their new genre book first. And so they go on like all these outings together to get inspiration for their books. So January takes Gus on a bunch of like romantic dates, and Gus takes her to interview a cult. Once again, I think this is one of Emily Henry's books where I feel like it veers into literary fiction, because there's so much more happening outside of the romance with these two characters. Even though the romance is amazing, the banter is amazing, the chemistry is amazing because it's Emily Henry, there's so many interesting aspects that we learn throughout the book about these characters, and we watch them like grow and evolve. I am very glad that I reread it. I gave it, I don't know if I said this, I gave it 4.5 stars. I think the first time I gave it 4 stars. I love Gus. He's top tier book boyfriend. We're already veering into August. We're in August. I didn't realize that. Beach Read was August. You may recall, did a August TBR jar video where it picked my August books, and I actually think I did pretty good because I read 4 out of 6 books that I picked in that video this month. Beach Read was one of them. The next one is The Maid by Nita Prose. I didn't like this book. I'm so sorry, because I know people love it. It won a Goodreads Choice Award. That's why that's the prompt that picked this book. I ended up giving this book 2 stars. I don't know what it was, because I think it was well written, and the story was somewhat interesting. It's basically about a maid who finds like a super high profile client dead in their hotel, and then she becomes the prime suspect in his murder because she doesn't pick up on social cues very well. She doesn't like present herself the way like people expect someone to present themselves necessarily. Okay, I don't know. I first of all didn't love our main character. It felt like reading an unreliable narrator in like a frustrating way. You can tell that she's like intentionally keeping things from you while you're reading this book. It honestly, like the murder happens like really, really soon in the book, and then the rest of the book, I feel like nothing really happens because like they don't solve we don't solve the case until the epilogue basically. And so like the entire middle of this book, it feels like nothing's happening because it's just Molly, who's the main character, the maid, and some of her like friends trying to prove her innocence. Okay, I'm editing this video now and I feel like I was struggling to articulate my thoughts, but I think the reason that I didn't like it as much as I expected to is because instead of the book being focused on trying to solve like the murder that happened, most of the book is focused on trying to prove Molly's innocence without really caring about like who actually murdered this man. So I feel like if you go into it expecting like a classic thriller, that's not really what you're gonna get out of it. And I don't know, the pacing fell off for me. That's just my opinion. I wouldn't say it's a bad book. It's just wasn't really for me. And then the next book I read was the Heartstopper yearbook, which again is pretty short and it's a lot of like illustrations and stuff like that. Like Alice's process drawing the comics and coming up with all the characters, and there's character profiles and mini comics and everything. And it's just very beautiful, very cute. I was reading this because I wanted to kind of go through it, but I wanted to go through it all before season 2 of Heartstopper came out, which also, side note, amazing. Yeah, it was just a fun read. I gave it 4 stars. I feel like it's kind of hard to, like, same with How the King of Elfhame Learned to Hate Stories and this, I feel like they're kind of hard to rate because they're not like stories. So yeah, it was beautiful. It was fun to read and look through. I went through it in like an hour. So this is where I like derailed my August TBR, and that is because I made the decision to read Fourth Wing because I feel like everyone has read it, and I was like, I need to know what the hype is about, and I am so glad I read it. I should have put this on my TBR honestly because I was very certain that this was gonna be a 5-star read for me, and I honestly kind of just forgot that I owned it. So I should have put this as my I think it'll be a 5-star read prompt because there was just no way that I wasn't gonna read this book. I loved it. I gave this book 5 stars. It was a 5-star book. It took me like a little bit to get into it, which I'm not even sure why, because this book jumps into the action so fast. Like our main character Violet, she lives in this world where they've been at war for like 600 years, and so everyone kind of gets put into a quadrant. So she was training for the scribe quadrant, which are like writers and people that like track history, but then her mom, who's like the general, forced her into the writers quadrant, which are like the soldiers, and they get like paired up with dragons and they fight in wars. And her whole family before her had been writers, so her mom was like, you need to be a writer too. So she ends up doing all the like tests and trials to get into the writers quadrant, which is obviously the most dangerous quadrant, and they lose like a ton of the recruits like before they're even like in the quadrant. Like the first challenge they lose like 15% of the people trying to be a writer. So it's very high stakes, it's very dark, and we immediately jump into that first trial, which is you have to walk across a parapet like super high in the sky, and if you fall you die. So that's like what we jump into immediately. And I honestly thought that this whole book was going to be Violet working up to like, I mean this isn't really a spoiler because she's the main character, so like she doesn't die obviously, working up to getting a dragon. That's what I thought this whole book would be, but that's like not even half the book. So much happens in this book, and that's why I loved it. I can see why some people said it felt like there was like too much going on in this book, but for me this had like every fantasy trope that I love, and it's enemies to lovers, it has dragons, it has magic, it has like super high stakes. Like this is a book that I could not put down. I read a good like 60% of this in one night. For like 5 hours I just read because it was so good. I love all the characters so much. The world building is incredible. It's super interesting. It's a little bit overwhelming at first, but things are kind of dropped in throughout the story and eventually you start picking up on it. I still don't really understand like the wings and stuff like that. Like she's in Fourth Wing, hence the title. She's in the Fourth Wing. I don't really know what that means, but you don't really need to know what that means. It still works. It's still a good book. I mean, you probably read this, but if you haven't, I highly recommend. It does give me kind of ACOTAR vibes, which I love ACOTAR, so I love this book. And then, okay, so this was also my TBR, and if you watch that video, I was not excited about this. And I was right. This is Little Beast by Julia Demers. Sorry, Julia. This is a Quebec novel. And I would love to support Canadian authors. I really would. And I do sometimes, but this was not it for me. This is about a girl in rural Quebec in 1944 who is 11 years old and grows a beard, and then her town is like, that's not okay. And then they hunt her through the woods. This is only like 120 pages. I think I read it in like an hour and a half. The way this book made me feel negative, it was so bad. Though I don't know how to explain the way this book made me feel, but it was bad. It was bad. There's a lot of like weird dead animal imagery used in this, which is just like not my favorite thing to read about, and like creepy men trying to find this little girl, and this little girl like briefly thinks about having sex with a rooster. Like there's you know, there's like meaning somewhere in there, you know, there's something in there, but I can't unpack that. I simply can't. So I give this book 2 stars. I would give it 1 star like personally, but I also feel like I'm literally too dumb to understand what this is trying to say. It just freaked me out, so that's why I give it 2 stars. So it's off my TBR, at least. And then the final book that I read in August was Icebreaker by Hannah Grace. I didn't love this one. I have to be honest. First of all, this book is almost the same length as Fourth Wing. Why? There's never really a reason for a romance to be over 400 pages long, you know? Like, that's an insane length for a romance. And to me, it felt like nothing was happening in this book. Like, it dragged for me. And the writing was a little bit cringe. It felt kind of Wattpad, but I don't think it was like bad necessarily. Like, the romance at certain points I did like, but I feel like they would build up to something like a big hockey game or a big, oh, by the way, this is about a figure skater and a hockey player that get together. And they would like build up to like a big hockey game or a big skating tournament, and then it would happen like off page. Like, you'd go to the next chapter and they'd be like, and we won, and now it's time to party, and then you just read like party after party after party instead of like building tension through those games and those like competitions. It made it like fall a bit flat for me personally. The found family in this was kind of fun. The hockey players and Anastasia, who's our main character, the figure skater, and her friend Lola, they kind of like move into the house of the hockey players for a while. It's cute. There was definitely some funny lines with like all of them together in a group. Those were probably some of my favorite scenes. I was reading this book one night and I was like, I'm just gonna finish it. I think I started reading at like page 200, and it's 420 pages or something. So I was like, I'll just finish it. It's fine. I can just finish it. But at like page 350, I was so like drained from this book. Like, it just felt like nothing was happening. And I was like, how is there still 100 pages left? So I had to put it down, which sucks because if I'm like really into a book, like I definitely can just read forever until I finish it. I ended up giving this book 2.5 stars. It was just kind of underwhelming. And I think also because it's so like hyped up, I probably had like higher expectations going into it, but it's just very Wattpad in my opinion, so do with that what you will. So those are all the books that I read this summer. We had quite a mixed bag, honestly. Some really good books, like 5-star books, and then some like 2-star books. I'm pretty proud of myself. I'm mostly caught up with my Goodreads reading goal, which is good because I'm struggling a little bit with just like work and YouTube and like life. Let me know if you've read any of these. Let me know what your favorite or least favorite book you read this summer has been. You can subscribe down below for new bookish videos every single week, and I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye!